Hello there, I'm back again to ask you, the listener, an enormous favour. It is Podcast Awards season and the Irish Podcast Awards are very quickly coming up. And I would really appreciate it if you could vote for Real Life Ghost Stories in the Listener's Choice Award for the Irish Podcast Awards. You just need to go to the irishpodcastawards.ie/voting to cast your vote. The voting is open until October the 19th, 2023. You can vote once per email address and you can vote from anywhere in the world. You just need to remember to confirm your vote via email, and I promise you it takes 30 seconds, maybe even a minute at most to cast your vote, and I would appreciate it so much if you could vote for Real Life Ghost Stories. Here's the thing, most indie podcasts don't have budgets to even enter into most of the award ceremonies that go on for podcasting, and voting in a Listener's Choice Award is just a really good way to advertise for that podcast, and the little glimmer of hope that I might actually win brings me a certain amount of joy on a day-to-day basis. So if you are somebody who listens to Real Life Ghost Stories on the reg, if you like the content, I would really appreciate it if you could go to the irishpodcastawards.ie/voting to cast your vote. Thank you. I love you. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to 31 Days of Terror 2023, day number 6. And I have 3 spooky stories for you today. And the first story was sent in by Kate. She discovered it while she was perusing Reddit and sent it my way. The link to the original story will be in the description of this episode, so let's go. I used to work as an ambulance dispatcher and regularly dealt with some grim jobs. Rarely spoke to patients except to get their location or gain access when crews couldn't locate or access. One night we had an elderly woman who was uninjured on the floor, and it took us a couple of hours to get a crew to her. She was phoned on 2 or 3 occasions by a clinician to ensure she wasn't worsening. She had her phone with her on the floor and answered it each time and was reported as in good spirits. The notes said she kept apologising and she felt silly and didn't want to make a fuss, bless her. Our crew got to her front door and predictably couldn't get in, but there was a key safe. I called the patient and she answered. She was alert and sounded tired but very much with it. I asked her for the code, hung up and radioed the code to the crew. They were in and beside her within a minute, and they immediately radioed back to say the patient was dead and stone cold, as though she had been dead for some time. It freaked me out, and I rationalised at the time that an old lady on the floor would likely be quite cold anyway, and she may have just died in the minute between speaking to her and the crew getting in. However, I relayed this to the crew in the belief that if she had only just died that recently, CPR should be started and could be effective. They, being the licensed healthcare professionals on the scene, decided against this, but did hook up the ECG and found no trace on her at all. I even went through my due diligence to confirm we were at the right address, correct job details, patient names and everything matched. I called the phone number I spoke to the patient on and the crew confirmed it was on the dead lady. It always sat oddly with me, because even if I didn't speak to an old lady from beyond the pale, I at least heard her last words, and we might have saved her life being there earlier, despite clinicians assessing her over the phone and her sounding bright and with it. This is such an interesting story, and for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think people who work as dispatchers, as well as obviously people who work as first responders, who paramedics, police officers, whatever, who get to a scene and things haven't gone the way that you would like it to go, but also for dispatchers who are speaking to people, and in this instance speaking to a woman and then being told no, she's already dead. Like, that level of guilt must be astounding. That level of, if we had done something quicker, if this had happened, if that had happened, it must be astounding. But in reality, you make judgments based on the information that is given to you, And that's part and parcel of being a healthcare dispatcher or a first responder. And there also is a reality that when a person has been dead for some time, their body demonstrates that they've been dead for some time. And from experience, first responders will hook up a body to machines that will tell you whether or not defib or CPR is necessary or will make any difference. And maybe this woman, this older woman from beyond the beyond, wanted her body to be taken out of the house in a dignified way and wanted the crew to be able to get in a dignified way. And that was why she answered the phone from beyond the beyond to give the code to the door. I don't know. So many times we've had stories of phone calls from the beyond or people hearing people's voices from the beyond where the realisation is that they've been dead for some time. And I think there might just be something in it. And story number 2 comes from Jon. In my early teens, I moved with my family to another part of town, near where my paternal grandmother lived in South Wales. She and my father had been estranged for years following the death of my older cousin in a fire. There were only a few months between my cousin and I. Later, I found out my grandmother couldn't be around me as a child due to the grief of losing my cousin and her grandson. An older cousin and I became friends and would rent VHS tapes and watch them at the weekend at my grandma's house while she was out caring for my great-grandmother. I'd always felt uncomfortable in my grandmother's house and hated going upstairs on my own. However, I needed to use the bathroom. As I put my foot on the bottom step, I felt fear. I took another step and felt all the hairs on my body stand on end. I looked up and saw a small but concentrated mist begin to form. It looked like the way paint swirls in the water when you rinse a paintbrush. After staring for a second or two and being completely paralysed from fear, the mist grew and rushed towards me. The mist stopped about a foot from my face, and from the mist a face materialised. It was an old man. His mouth screamed. I could feel the heat from his breath and smell the rancid, rotten teeth. I was suddenly able to move. I ran from the house, found my way back home and hid in my room. My parents were extremely concerned. I explained what had happened and they didn't believe me. My cousin confided in our great-grandmother, who struggled to walk and was essentially housebound. She explained what happened, and she told my cousin, "I know, he's been in my dreams." She insisted on visiting the house and confronting the spirit. I stayed well clear. I was told later by my cousin that our great-grandma entered the house and the temperature dropped. A foul smell grew and creaks and knocks could be heard upstairs, and there was nobody upstairs. My father got a chair for my great-grandma to sit at the bottom of the stairs. She sat there, calling out to the spirit, challenging him to dare to show his face again. Some time later, she was observed looking up the stairs, pointing towards the landing and said, "I can see you, you bastard, you coward, I see you." She stood and began to swear at the entity only she could see at the top of the stairs. My cousin and my father never told me how she managed to get rid of it, but even now when I think back to that day, my first contact with that spirit, I get goosebumps and my hair stand on end. To this day I can still sense when things are close. I dream about places I've never visited and can describe them in great detail. I can picture details when overhearing conversations. When I explain these details to people, they ask how I can know this. I explain that I saw you in my mind. I was you. I never hear anything, I just see it. My cousin explained that our great-grandmother was a witch and would read palms during the war. My cousin believes some of my great-grandmother's talent may have come to me. My cousin strongly believes the spirit was drawn to me during my teens, as they could sense that I could feel them close by. Luckily, my great-grandmother was able to send this one away. Now, if I sense anything sinister, I get my fat ass out of there before I see too much. Oh my God, Jon, this is terrifying. And it just goes to show that intuition is such a powerful thing, that although the majority of us may not actually see anything, you get that intuition, that fear, that hair standing on end, that feeling in the pit of your stomach like, oh, something's here that I don't like. And you believe that because otherwise you're going to get an old man mist right up in your face. And it sounds like your cousin is right. It sounds like you inherited some of those spooky abilities from your absolutely badass great-grandmother, as if she was like, let me go over there, sit at the bottom of the stairs, and I'm going to call that dickhead out, and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to absolutely lay into him and swear at him and shout at him. Oh, what a woman. I love her. Remake the Ghostbusters, but with the Ghostbusters as your great-grandmother. And there's so much anecdotal evidence to suggest that these powers, these abilities, this sensitivity, whatever you like to call it, is passed down through the generations. So why not? It sounds like you got a dose of whatever spiritual power your great-grandmother has. And if I were you, I'd be thinking to myself, I can only hope to be half as badass as this woman. And story number 3 comes from Chelsea. In 2022, I sadly lost my long-term partner to suicide. I woke up to discover him at the staircase while I was waking up my son and him for nursery and work. After this, I have had ghostly experiences, which I believe is him, and I do find it extremely comforting. I have decided to stay in our house where it happened, as it was our first family home. I've witnessed doors to our room creak open and closed. And just to clarify, I don't enjoy the cold. I never have windows or fans on in my home, so there would be no wind or breeze in the house to open and close over my room door. I've had lights turning on and off randomly, and even the letterbox being chapped with no one outside. The staircase where I discovered him was the way towards the front door, and I get random bangs in the house, and even had our son, who's 4, say that he is talking to Daddy. And I've had him tell my friends that Daddy's over there, pointing to a part of the couch that he always sat in. I've also been woken up in our bed by something which I presume is him on the bed lying next to me, and my face being touched, which feels cold yet tingly. And smells of his favourite aftershave can be randomly smelled around the house, usually before or after something happens. I know it's not the usual scary burn the house down ghost demon type story. I just wanted to share an experience that is so comforting to me, as I think it is my partner, and I'm somewhat happy that he's still around us. Chelsea, I am so deeply sorry that you have had to go through this, you and your little one. I can't even begin to comprehend what it must feel like for you to have been the person to wake up and discover him, and to have had to live with the loss every day since then. And I hope that in some tiny way you've been able to find moments of peace in your life since then, whatever that might look like. And from your story, it really does sound like he is there watching over you and your little boy. And we always say that kids are so much more perceptive to things like this than adults are. They're so much more accepting and open to these kind of things. So maybe what your little boy is saying is true. You know, maybe he is seeing his dad around the house and his dad is looking after him. And it does sound like he is trying to be there for you in ways that aren't too terrifying. You know, nice things like smelling his aftershave and getting the feeling of somebody touching your face. It sounds like he is really there trying to keep an eye on you guys and comfort you guys. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Kate, Jon and Chelsea for sending in your stories. Remember, if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you tomorrow. Hello there, I'm back again to ask you, the listener, an enormous favour. It is podcast awards season, and the Irish Podcast Awards are very quickly coming up. And I would really appreciate it if you could vote for Real Life Ghost Stories in the Listener's Choice Award for the Irish Podcast Awards. You just need to go to theirishpodcastawards.ie/voting to cast your vote. The voting is open until October the 19th, 2023. You can vote once per email address, and you can vote from anywhere in the world. You just need to remember to confirm your vote via email, and I promise you it takes 30 seconds, maybe even a minute at most to cast your vote, and I would appreciate it so much if you could vote for Real Life Ghost Stories. Here's the thing, most indie podcasts don't have budgets to even enter into most of the award ceremonies that go on for podcasting, and voting in a Listener's Choice Award is just a really good way to advertise for that podcast, and the little glimmer of hope that I might actually win brings me a certain amount of joy on a day-to-day basis. So if you are somebody who listens to Real Life Ghost Stories on the reg, if you like the content, I would really appreciate it if you could go to the irishpodcastawards.ie/voting to cast your vote. Thank you. I love you. Enjoy the episode.